Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Swaroop. I'm Associate Professor in Pathology from Sri Devaraja Medical College, and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'll be predominantly talking on how to prepare MCQs, that is multiple choice questions, and after you have prepared, how to do an item analysis and verify your MCQs. So before I begin, a disclaimer that kindly do not go through the content of my MCQs, as I'm not a subject expert for all the subjects, and I have tried to give examples from different subjects. So just look at the concept of preparing the MCQs. So this particular video will have these subheadings. First, I'll discuss the objectives, then introduction about MCQs. So before I go into how to prepare a perfect MCQ, I'll first give you some examples of errors, which is followed by how to prepare an MCQ, then item analysis, online tools that you can use to give the MCQ to your students, and then finally, online tools to do an item analysis of your MCQs. So at the end of this video, what I will expect from the participants or the audience who is looking at my video is you must be able to frame an MCQ. You'll be able to identify errors in improperly framed MCQs, and you will be able to know what are the tests that we use for item analysis of MCQs, and you will be able to assist others in doing this item analysis. So as we all know, assessment is an important component of the teaching learning process, and assessment even drives learning. So why do we use assessments? There are various reasons why do we use the assessments. One of the simplest is when we want to know the performance of the student. You want to grade your student, you give him an assessment. But we don't understand that assessment in turn can even help the student motivate himself for learning. And when you ask a question, the student will be curious to find the answer. So indirectly, it will even encourage him for self-directed learning. And sometimes when we ask questions, you will realize that whatever topics you have not covered, the student will himself go in to understand those topics. So it will even fill in some of those instructional gaps. And for the teacher, if you know that a student is not doing well in assessment, it even helps him in understanding the deficiency in his lectures. So when you give assessment at the end of the year, it will even help you in identifying the areas where your course content delivery or your overall curriculum is weak. So the first question comes, what all should we test in assessment? So as expected, so whatever you test must be those important topics, core areas, your must know areas. Definitely they must be from your course objectives. The topics must be relatively important and must be an overall representative of your instructional goal. So whatever you have taught them, this must be an overall representative. So if you see this pyramid, you will see that learning objectives are usually derived from your learning outcomes. So usually your assessment will assess these learning objectives, and your teaching approach must also suit your assessment. So how much of what should be tested? So in the current scenario, we may be giving a lot of MCQs to our students. So whatever topic I take, I may indirectly be giving them the same number of MCQs. So overall, if we have covered 5 topics and in the end of the month, you want to conduct an MCQ test, we actually give a similar number of questions from all topics. But this should not be the scenario. So what should you test or how much should you test? At least more than 70% must be from your must know areas or your core areas, and the remaining can be from the nice to know and desirable or your non-core areas. And weightage for the topic must be based on the blueprint. So how do you give a blueprint? One simple formula is the weightage will be directly dependent on the impact of the topic and on the frequency of the topic. So you give a score of 1 to 3 for impact and a score of 1 to 3 for frequency. So for impact, it is dependent on its public health importance. So you can classify a score of 1 if it is a less public health important topic, and 3 if it is a highly public health important topic. So something which is currently rare, like syphilis, can be given less public health importance, whereas something that is very common or prevalent as of now in India, like Mycobacterium tuberculosis, can be given as a high public health importance topic. Next, we look at frequency. So you have to give a score of 1 to 3 based on the frequency of the asked question. 1 if it is less frequently asked, and 3 if it is more frequently asked. So based on this, for each of your topics, you can give us impact score of 1 to 3 and a frequency score of 1 to 3. Then you have to multiply the two to get an impact into frequency score. And now to get the weightage, you divide this impact into frequency score by the total. So you will get a percentage. So you have to multiply it into 100. So this number of 0.07 is 7%. So from this first chapter, 7% of the MCQs can come. From the second chapter, 17%. So indirectly, if you're setting an MCQ paper for 100 marks, I can tell you that 7 marks, or if it's 1 MCQ is equal to 1 mark, 7 MCQs from the first chapter, 17 from the second, 7 from the third, 17 from the fourth, and so on. So first you have to decide the impact, the frequency, you have to multiply the two, then you have to get the weightage by dividing this number by the total that you get, and you convert it into percentage by multiplying it to 100. So it will become 7%. So this must be the percentage of your total MCQs that you test. So the total MCQ is 60%, 60 marks, then this will be 7% out of 60 marks. So to make it simple, I told you as 100 marks, so that the 7% becomes literally 7 marks. So once you have decided how many MCQs you have to give per chapter, so the next, what we want to do is, what are the different types of questions? So other than MCQs, we all know the other types of questions that come in our exam are long essay, short notes, fill in the blanks, and MCQs. Why I'm covering MCQs predominantly is that we can usually deliver these MCQs through online medium or online tools, and I'll show you how to use one of these online tools to even do an item analysis. So coming to the topic, that is MCQ or multiple choice question. So in some books, they will even call it as an item. So what is it suited for? So most of your theory questions, including MCQs, are suited to test the cognitive domain. You can test a wide range of topics. So if you give predominantly long essays, for a 100-mark paper, you're limited to only 10 long essays. So you may not be able to cover all the topics. Whereas when you're using MCQs, you can test a wide range of topics and a short duration. Multiple choice questions are usually can provide rapid assessment. They're reliable and valid. But for MCQs to be all that, at least 60 to 100 MCQs must be tested at a time. So if you want to test the entire wide range of the topic, you must at least give 60 to 100 MCQs. You cannot use only 5 to 10 MCQs and grade your students. And for each MCQ, you have to give the student at least 45 to 90 seconds. And this time may be dependent on the complexity of the question, whether it's a case-based or a direct question. So the length of the stem also may decide. So the types of MCQs are single best response, which is commonly used in most of your multiple choice questions, where there's only a single right answer. Then is your multiple response type, which has more than one right answer, which was used in some of those MCQ questions given in PGI Chandigarh exam. And then you have your extended matching questions. These are sort of advanced MCQs, which we'll be covering in the end. Coming to the parts of the MCQ. So every MCQ questionnaire will usually have one line which gives us the instruction, which is like select the most appropriate single response for the question. Then it has the text, which is the main part of the MCQ. For example, here it is, a 30-year-old with history of fever and cough with expectoration since 4 days. CBC showing neutrophilic leukocytosis, and X-ray shows features of consolidation. The likely diagnosis is, and in the end there is one small question, the likely diagnosis is, which is followed by the 4 options. So the first instruction, that is select the most appropriate single response, that is the direction. The main part of the question, that is whatever we consider as the question, that is the stem. And that last line, that is the likely diagnosis, so that is called as the lead. And out of the 4 answers, usually there is one correct answer. So that correct answer is the key, and the rest of them are distractors. So the instruction is the direction, the main MCQ is the stem, the last line, that is the likely diagnosis, is lead. In the answers, the correct answer is the key, and the rest of the answers are distractors. So whenever we write any MCQ, it must have all these parts: the direction, the stem, the lead, the key, the distractors. It must have a reference, that is the book which you're quoting for this particular MCQ. So you should write the book, the name of the book, the edition, the volume, and the page number. So next we'll go to some errors that we usually commit when we create multiple choice questions. Here, a 50-year-old was brought unconscious to the casualty. After ascertaining his airway is open, the first step is IV administration of. So when you look at these options, you see the first option is CSF examination, glucose with thiamine, MRI scan of head, and phenytoin. You will immediately realize that something is not right in the options. So here you can see that there is no continuity. So if I read these answers, the first step is IV administration of CSF examination. So there is no continuity. So here they don't follow the stem. So these investigations like CSF and MRI, they don't follow the stem, that is IV administration of. So these 2 answers are immediately eliminated by the student. So you must not have an MCQ where 2 answers have no meaning and can be immediately eliminated. Here the main reason is because it does not have a continuity with the stem. Next we will go in a Next, we will go. In a patient with Alzheimer's disease, the memory defect can be treated with lecithin, can be a sequelae of Parkinsonism, is never severe, is always associated with neurofibrillary tangles. So in medicine, we always know that never and always is almost never true, because every disease will have one atypical presentation or one scenario where the disease can be less severe. So the student, what he will do is, he will immediately decide that these 2 are definitely wrong. So, and that is why the terms such as never, always, usually, rarely should never be there in the options in an MCQ. You may have these words in your stem, but they should never be in the options, because if it is there in the options, they are definitely wrong choices, and student will immediately eliminate these 2 options. Next MCQ. A 55-year-old man with history of alcoholism is brought to the casualty and speaks of experiencing the world as unreal. This is derailment, derealization, focal memory deficit, and depersonalization. So when a student who even does not know the topic, he just reads the question and the answer, he realizes that the word real is there in the question and in the answer, and maybe the most possible answer. So you must never use a word that is there both in the stem and an answer, which is usually the correct response. So a word that is there in the stem should usually not be repeated in any of your answers. Next, following an episode of pelvic infection, the likelihood of infertility in women is less than 20%, 20 to 30, 90, and 75. So when there is a question like this, a student immediately knows that the answer cannot be a single percentage. So it has to be a range. So once I make that decision, so I know automatically that this 90 and 75 are wrong answers and can be immediately eliminated. So if there is percentages or numerical data, they must be very similar. So if it is less than 20, 20 to 30, the other two options must also be 30 to 50 and 50 to 70, or they must all be single percentages, 20, 90, 30, and 75. So the moment you have one range and one single number, looking at the question, the student can immediately decide that few of these options are wrong. So here, looking at the question, he knows that these single digit options can never be true and they definitely eliminate it. So what are the common errors that we commit? First is grammatical errors, like the one we saw where there is IV administration of and an investigation is given. So the answers don't follow the stem. Next, logical cues. You give some hints in the stem which are there even in your options. So the same word is used. That should also never be used. You should always use absolute terms and should never use terms such as always, never, rarely, and usually. And some of us have this habit of giving long answers as the correct answer, whereas for the rest, we give any option that we can think of and they're usually short. So students end up guessing that if out of the four, three of them are short one word and only one is a long answer, they guess that the longest one is correct and usually it is true. And finally, coming to convergence strategy, where the student can make out that one of the answers is a combination of the above answers, and most of the time this combination is usually right. So you must never have answers that are combinations of each other. So usually they must be avoided. Then there are certain other issues. It is always preferred that the stem is the long, that is the question is lengthy and the options must be short. You must never have the other way around, that the question is short and the options are lengthy, because the idea is not to confuse the student by your question, but to determine whether he knows the answer to that particular concept or not. So it is MCQs are never designed to trick the person who is answering them. So numerical data must not be mixed. So you must not have percentages, single percentages and ranges. Non-logical options should not be there. So you should not give symptoms of CVS and give some options of CNS as diagnosis, which the student can immediately decide that they are wrong. None of the above is usually not a preferred option, because when you're trying to assess the knowledge, we want one of the answers to be correct. So we don't want it to be as none of the above, because that doesn't help us to identify whether the student knows a particular concept or not. You should never use tricky stems and they must be straightforward. So you should not mix up English using double negatives or double positives, all except, is not. All of these words must be avoided when you prepare an MCQ. So if you're preparing an MCQ, these are the general rules. As most of us use single response, so in the options, either the options must be 100% true or false. So you must never have borderline or gray zone options. Stem must be long, options must be short. Tricky questions should never be given in MCQs, because the idea is to make sure that the student has understood the concept and not your hold on the vocabulary or grammar. Options must be grammatically correct. So the stem must follow the options, it must not be that some of the options don't fit in with the stem. Never use words like never, always, usually, and frequently, because most of the time these are wrong choices, and even if by mistake you think them as right, a student can always prove you wrong. Avoid negatively phrased MCQs such as except or not in the lead question. So now coming to how to frame an MCQ. So we know when MCQs are used, how much percentage of our question should be MCQs, what are the common errors that we commit when we prepare MCQs. Now how to prepare an MCQ. So usually whenever you prepare an MCQ, make it a point that every MCQ must test only one concept. Don't try to mix up 2-3 concepts and try to assess them in a single MCQ. Usually that should be avoided. MCQs must not be used for recall, and you should likely prefer to go into the higher level of Bloom's taxonomy. At least the understanding of the subject, the application of the subject, the analysis of the concept, or the evaluation, or if we can create some new protocol from whatever you have taught. So at least it must be higher than your remembering or recall level. STEM must be very clear and there must be only one correct option. All the distractors must be homogeneous, meaning if everything is one word, if everything is a word, all of them must be one word. If all are diagnoses, then there should be no single symptom or sign in them. They should not be mixed. Few are investigations and few are diagnosis, because the moment you do that, the student can rule out some of your answers. And all the distractors must be functional. You should just not give 4 options because every question must have 4. So if you feel there are only 3 logical options, then you give only 3 options. And you must avoid all the flaws or errors that I have mentioned in the previous slide. So as we've already highlighted, the MCQs must not be designed for recall, because if you just want recall, probably a fill in the blanks will do. You don't need to give him a MCQ. And when it is recall level, it is very easy, because when the student looks at the answer, probably he'll get it right more easily than fill in the blanks. So MCQ must be for at least understanding level and must be interpretation based, problem solving, comprehension or reasoning kind of MCQs. So instead of asking, if you want the answer as facial nerve anatomy, instead of asking the question as is recall as cauda tympani is a branch of, you can convert the same answer by his applied anatomy of facial nerve and convert it into a case where you're asking a 45-year-old male presents with symptoms of Bell's palsy and which is the nerve affected. So you're getting the same answer, but the way you're asking the question is different. So here the clinical vignette is the one that is usually preferred. So here I'm giving you one more example. This is an example probably from pathology or medicine or even pediatrics for acute intermittent porphyria. So you want him to know, so you want to test the concept whether he knows that it is because of the defect in the biosynthesis of heme. But instead of directly asking him acute intermittent porphyria is and making it recall type, here we have used a case scenario of acute intermittent porphyria, and then we have just not asked him what is the diagnosis. Now we have asked him what is the biosynthetic pathway defect. So first he has to read this question, understand, and he must be able to apply his knowledge and deduce that the answer is acute intermittent porphyria. Then he use his knowledge about the topic and he'll be able to answer this question as him. So the answer may appear same, but the level of knowledge that you're testing is much higher in this clinical question when you compare with this direct question. Here also I'm giving one example from obstetrics or radiology. So here I'm directly asking what is the indication of fetal karyotyping in a young female, whereas here I am giving a history of a young female with certain risk factors, and now I'm asking which is the test that you would likely do to assess this patient. So here you just need to remember the topic, that is indications of fetal karyotyping. Whereas to answer this question, first I must know out of the given family history and other history, which is the one that will be a risk factor for her pregnancy, and considering that risk factor, what is the likely diagnosis, and for that diagnosis, which is the most suitable laboratory investigation. So you can imagine the level of thinking that must go on for the student to answer this particular question. Then next way is giving this problem based question. So you can give your problem solving questions. So here the question is usually a clinical vignette. So a 30-year-old with severe diarrhea diagnosed with HIV, and physical examination reveals so and so. So with the same stem, I am having two leads and two options. So you can either assess the laboratory investigations, or you can assess the diagnostic test that is needed for the clinching your diagnosis. So here you can see for the same stem, you can use different leads and multiple options. So don't think that if you prepare one clinical vignette taking lot of pains, it will only end up as a single MCQ. For the same clinical vignette, I can prepare 2 or even 10 MCQs, because in each MCQ I am assessing different things. In the first one, I am assessing the laboratory changes. The next one, I am assessing the tests needed. One more, you can assess the treatment options. So you have multiple things that you can test for using the same stem. Next, I'll give you examples of MCQs, case based, used for different things. So first one is an example for a medicine. For medicine, so it can be a UG or PG level. So you are giving a history of elderly male with raised cholesterol levels, but normal HDL levels, and the ECG being normal. So here you are checking, first of all, whether he can understand that these laboratory investigations are normal or abnormal, and what does it mean when some investigations are abnormal but the others are normal, and what will be his diagnosis for the patient, and if he gets the diagnosis, what will be his recommendation to the patient. So here the patient only has borderline raised cholesterol levels, so he has to understand that this patient may not need the options like reducing intake of his fats, or change to a complex carbohydrate diet, or decreasing the intake of fiber, and the answer may just be no change in diet. So to come up or to rule out all these options, he must understand the value of each of these individual investigations, and in combination with the patient's age and other findings, and only then can he give the treatment protocol. So this is a very difficult question, or it's a question that checks for much higher level of learning. Next, we'll come to a case scenario for etiopathogenesis. So here, same thing. The above is a case for your post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, that is a child with hematuria, sore throat, hypertension, periorbital edema, and slightly, this is a normal blood urea nitrogen. So here, instead of just asking you the diagnosis, even the diagnosis is probably an understanding level question, but I've gone one step higher and I've chosen to see the application of the knowledge. So not just understanding and coming up with a diagnosis of post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. Now you have to think, what is the etiopathogenesis behind that disease? So if you know that there is damage to the glomeruli, only then can you come with this diagnosis. Next, you can do Case scenarios for diagnosis I have not given in particular, because most of the time when someone tells us a case scenario for MCQ, we always think in terms of diagnosis. So here I have given in terms of management. So here they're giving a 55-year-old male with ECG changes suggesting hypokalemia and history of drug which causes hypokalemia. So what should be the IV treatment for her? So you should know the symptom edema is due to what. Then you must go back to her drug history and know the side effects of the drugs and know what these ECG changes represent. And only when you have understood these three things can you then solve the question as what should be the drug IV administration. You should know the diagnosis, and only then you can go to management. So next we'll come to something called as complex MCQs or extended matching items. These are not routinely used, so I will not suggest that you start off with them. Initially start off with standard MCQs, your case-based vignettes, and then move to these complex MCQs. So here it may look very simple. So first you give the student a set of items. So sorry, a set of options. So the options here are most of the viruses that we know and few bacteria. And there is even a few parasites. And next, when you go, you will see that here the direction is for each case, you have to select the most likely pathogen. And they have given 3 cases. So for each of these cases, you have to choose one of these pathogens. So you can even have a multiple response also, where if this is in the form of treatment, more than one answer can be right. But here, there's only a single best response. So here, in the case scenarios, they have given one case scenario classical for your streptococcal infection with your blood culture, your throat culture reports, highlighting that it is streptococcus. Next, a history of infectious mononucleosis, so that you can now identify that Epstein-Barr virus is the causator. Finally, a complete microbiology oriented question where the answer can be Neisseria. So here you can see 3 questions for the same set of responses. So where else can we use this? So if I'm an anatomy teacher, I can give the initial options as vessels, nerves, veins, or muscles, and I can tell for the particular case which is the vessel, nerve, or muscle involved. So what I prefer is you choose either all your options as vessel or nerve. So if all the options are nerves, all your case scenarios will indicate damaged scenarios of damage to a particular nerve, and the options will be those particular nerves. So if you're doing a question regarding drugs, so what you can do is these questions can be for all pharmacology and medicine related subjects. So all the options can be drugs, and you can have cases where the answer is either the drug of choice, or you're giving a scenario where the patient was given a particular drug and you're trying to highlight the adverse effect of those drugs. Then for all subjects, what we routinely can do is your first list of options can be diagnosis, and next you can have cases indicating those diagnoses. Then you can also have a set of investigations, and below you can give cases, and you can ask what is the investigation of choice to come up to the diagnosis. So you have multiple ways how you can use these complex MCQs or extended matching items. So when you prepare any of your clinical case scenarios, the clinical vignette, so what are the parts of it? First of all, you will write the age and gender of the patient. So usually you start off a case as 45-year-old male or 55-year-old female. Site of care, where does he visit? Presence at the casualty, presence to the obstetrics, presence at the orthopedic department. His presenting complaint, so with what history he has come, and what is the duration, any significant past or family history, physical findings or your physical examination findings if relevant, Diagnostic tests can be laboratory or radiological investigations which are relevant, including initial treatment or subsequent findings only if necessary. So probably most of them may end at the level of diagnostic tests. But if you are giving a much more complex question, you may even go up with the initial treatment and did it work or not. Okay. So once we have prepared an MCQ, we all want to know how do we assess whether the MCQ is perfect, so that we can directly start using them for your exams. So the exams can be formative or it can be a summative exams. So before you do an item analysis, you will have to give this to the student. So first, if you have designed 10 MCQs, you will have to do a pilot testing and give this 10 MCQs to your 150 batch. So in your formative assessments, you can use these MCQs so that they can be validated and you can use them in your summative exams. So the three common terminologies that we will come across when they do item analysis for MCQ is difficulty index, discrimination index, and distractor effectiveness. So we'll cover them one by one. So before you do item analysis, it means that you must have given your MCQs to students. So just after preparing MCQs, you can't do item analysis. So you have to prepare them, pilot them. So the piloting batch can be a smaller batch, but I prefer that at least you have 90 to 100 students, a minimum of 90 students. That is a must. So why I'm telling 90 is, after the students have answered, based on their marks, you will have to arrange them in descending order. So you have to put all their marks and the question and which question they got the correct answer, and you have to put the mark and arrange them in ascending order and divide them into 3 groups. And usually they prefer at least that each group has 30 students. So if each group has to have 30 students and there must be 3 groups, the obvious minimum becomes 90. So now the upper group, the ones who are topping are your high achievers, and the ones in the bottom 1/3 are your low performers or low achievers. So usually for this item analysis, most of the articles will tell you that you have to only consider these high achievers and low performers and ignore the responses of this mid 1/3 group. There are some articles which will tell that you can use the entire batch, but most of the articles will always tell that the indexes must be calculated based on only this upper 1/3 and lower 1/3. So next, in the formula, we'll use 3 alphabets, that is H, L, and T. H is the number of correct responses in the high achievers. L is the number of correct responses in low performers, and T is the total number of responses in high and low group. For example, you have given for one question when I'm calculating one of the indexes. So if in the high achievers, out of 30, 25 have got it right, so H will be 25. In low performers, if out of 30, only 5 have got it right, L will be only 5. And T will be total of H plus L, that is 30 plus 30, 60. So T is your total number of people in the H group and the L group. So if total students are 90, these groups will have 30 each, and T will be 60. So now we'll go to these indices one by one. First index, that is difficulty index. So in some softwares, it's also called as facility index. It is a misnomer. It is usually a easiness index, meaning the smaller the number, the bigger the number. For example, if it is 100%, if someone gets, it does not mean it is a 100% difficult question. It is the easiest question. Whereas if a question gets a difficulty index of 1%, that means it is a very difficult question. So that is why I call it as the easy index rather than the difficulty index. So how do you calculate it? The formula is number of correct responses by high achievers plus low achievers divided by the total number of responses into 100 to get a percentage. So if you are not using this 3 groups and you're considering it for the entire batch, then it is very simple. You just calculate it by total number of students who have got it right divided by the total number who have got it wrong into 100. So if your batch strength is 100 and 80% of the students are getting the question right, so it is 80%. It becomes the difficulty index. If only 5% of the students get it right, it is 5%. So this holds good when you're considering the entire group and you're not breaking them into high achievers and low achievers. So for an easy answer, I'll give an example of a batch of 150. So 50, 50, 50 will be there in these three groups. So if it is an easy question, I feel both high achievers and low performers will get it right. So 45 out of 50 high achievers get it right, and even 40 out of 50 low performers get it right. So the difficulty index will be 45 plus 40 divided by 100, that is your total number of students in both groups, into 100 to get a percentage. So it's 85%. That means it is 85% easy, this particular question. If it's a difficult question, only 2 of the bright students or your high achievers get it right, and 1 of your low performers or low achievers get it right. So its difficulty index will be 3%, meaning it is a very difficult question. So if you go back, a question is considered to have a good difficulty index when its difficulty index is between 30 to 70. So in MCQs, usually they don't prefer having having easy MCQs and difficult MCQs also. Most of your MCQs, that is 80 to 90% of your MCQs, must have a difficulty index of 30 to 70%. So what should we do? Should we discard all the easy ones and the difficult ones? Some of them will tell no. They believe that the easy ones or the questions with difficulty index above 70% can be used in the beginning of your MCQ test, so that the students feel good and feel a little confident, and the extremely difficult ones still be kept, so that there is a difference in marks between a very good student, a good student, an average student, and so on. Next, discrimination index. So it's called as discrimination because it means that this question can discriminate between a student who is a top scorer and a student who is a low performer. So what we expect is a good question will be predominantly or answered by a student who is performing well. So if a student has got 90% marks, you expect that he has got this particular question right. And if a student has got 20% marks, he has not answered that particular question, then that particular question has a very good discrimination index, because it is able to discriminate between a good student and a poor student. So how do you calculate it? Number of correct responses in the high achievers minus the ones in the low achievers divided by total number of students into 2. Any number more than 0.25 is considered good. Negative discrimination index is bad. So if you get a negative discrimination index, that means your top scorer is not answering that question and your low performer is answering that particular question. So that means that this particular question is not able to discriminate between a good student and a student who is not learning, and that is why this question has to be eliminated. So such a question should not be there in your question bank. So I'll give you an example. So as you know, a good discrimination index means the high achievers get it right, low achievers don't get it right. So for a particular question, if 40 out of the 50 high achievers get it right, but only 20 out of 50 of the low achievers are getting it right, calculation will be 40 minus 20 by 100 into 2, so that is 0.4. So I told you anything more than 0.25 is good. So this has a very good discrimination index. So I'll give you example of one more question where 30 out of 50 of the high achievers got it right and 28 out of the 50 of the low achievers also got it right. So meaning that this may be a good question, but this question does not have a good discrimination index, because both your high achievers and your low achievers are getting it right. So if you calculate it, you get a score of 0.04, which is very low. So since 0.25 is the cutoff, it is 0.04. So this question has a very bad discrimination index. So questions with low discrimination indexes, I don't mean that they should not be in your question bank, but you must always have 10 to 15% of the questions which have good discrimination indexes, because you want to distinguish between students who are doing well and not doing well. Whereas sometimes we don't want questions with discrimination index. For example, at the end of your class, what is my goal? I want all the students to get the answers right. So I am using questions which have very low discrimination index. But negative discrimination index questions should not be in your question bank and should be removed. Next, coming to distractor effectiveness. So what are distractors? In the beginning we covered. All the other options that are not correct answers are distractors. The correct answer is the key. So this particular difficulty index and your discrimination index is calculated for every question, whereas distractor effectiveness is calculated for every distractor, every option. So for every MCQ, if it has 4 options, for the 4 options you will get 4 different numbers for distractor effectiveness. For any distractor to be effective, its value must be more than 5%. So how do you calculate it? So your least chosen distractor you should pick, and among your high achievers and low achievers divided by the total number of respondents, and when you calculate a percentage must be should not be less than 5%. So I'll give you an example because here it may be sounding complicated. So you have a question and it has 4 options A, B, C, D. So first you will calculate the percentage of your students choosing which all options. So 64% of your students choose A, 12% choose B, 8% choose C, 12% choose D, and only 4% choose E. So what does it mean? It means that there is only 4% chance that someone is picking E. So if E is the correct answer, you don't have to calculate the distractor effectiveness. But if E is the wrong answer, it is a distractor. Then, and if its percentage is 4%, that means it is not doing a good job. That means people are not even considering it as an option. So now what should we do? You don't have to discard the MCQ. All you have to do is remove this particular distractor and give one more option and again calculate your distractor effectiveness, and overall no option must get less than 5% score. Because less than 5% means probably only when someone is randomly marking, he's marking that particular answer. Otherwise, logically, it is not an answer at all. So if you go back to our MCQs that we create, we will realize that most of our options will have, out of our 4, at least 1 or 2 will have less than 5%, because sometimes we give correct answer, second closest answer, the other 2 are just options because we just give them because you have to give 4 options, because of which they have very low distractor effectiveness. So you have to make sure that all the 4 options must be logical and must be selected by a student in case he has not understood the concept correctly. So next we'll come to what all tools can we use for delivering these multiple choice questions. So in this video, I'll not be covering how to use them, but I've already done videos for some of them. So you have Google Forms. That's the most common tool that anyone uses to give MCQs to students. There's one more equivalent by Microsoft called as Microsoft Forms, but has far lesser question options. But when it comes to MCQs, they are on par. You have similar options. Then there is MCQ delivery tool, which is predominantly in the form of a quiz. So that is Kahoot. So you have these speed response, the faster the response, more the score, the more consecutive response, more the score. So such options are there in tools such as Kahoot, Mentimeter, which are usually not there in Google Forms and Microsoft Forms. In Google Forms and Microsoft Forms, the marks are awarded for the correct answer only. So there is no extra marks for speed or getting consecutive answers right. And finally, in most of your learning management systems, let it be Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, they'll always have an integrated MCQ question delivery tool. So this may be something that is not a Google Form or Microsoft Forms, but which will function very similarly. So next, coming to which online tool you can use for item analysis. So the one that I know is Moodle. So you can use Moodle directly for item analysis. So you don't have to put all your marks in an Excel sheet, mark which is the correct answer and wrong answer, code them as zeros and ones, and then do your difficulty index, discrimination index, and your distractor effectiveness. If you are using Moodle, you can directly get all this without using any of the tools. So how will you do that? I will show you. So here I'm inside my learning management system. So in my institute, I'm using a Moodle based learning management system. So I'll go to one of the assignments. So you just have to give your quiz, and after the quiz has been answered, so you will, when you click the quiz, you will see something like this: number of time limit given, attempts by how many students. So now we have to right click on the settings on the right upper hand corner, and you have to scroll down to something called as statistics. So when you click the statistics, so now you get a kind of detailed report. So when you scroll down, you will see the average number of first attempts, average number of last attempts, median grade, score. And now you can see for every question, it gives us the facility index. So facility index is your difficulty index. So if the answer is, if I've got a question with 100%, what does it mean? Very easy answer. All the students have got it right. So if something has got 85%, that means 85% of the students have got it right. Ideal is 30 to 70%. So these are not ideal questions. These three are very easy questions. So this is a very difficult question, meaning only 28% have got it right. So this 59 is good. So the 70 is okay, this 41 is okay, and 55. So you can see overall, when we have conducted a multiple choice question quiz, so out of the 20, there are only 3 or 4 that I'm getting that have a satisfactory facility index, that is your difficulty index. Next, coming to discrimination index. So here it is given in percentage. So anything more than 25% is good. So if you see overall, most of the questions have more than 25. This one question is not good. It's both difficult and it does not have a very good discrimination index. It is only 7.76. So otherwise, most of the other questions have a good discrimination index. So this question has minus 36%. So this is the question that I was talking. This question has to be eliminated. Means that this not only does it not have the capacity to discriminate between or a high achiever and a low performer, but it gives us the reverse scenario where a low performer is getting it right, and most likely it usually does not indicate that he has understood the concept better, but maybe that some of the options are not given rightly. So next, if you want to see the distractor effectiveness, I should just click any of the options. So I'll click one of the options. So then it gives me a detailed statistics about that question. And if I go here, it shows me frequency. So frequency is the frequency of the participants choosing this particular option. So you can see the right answer as expected has the frequency of 75%. Whereas you are seeing below, you're seeing that there is one option which is only 1.94% and the other one is 5.8. So any distractor with less than 5% should be eliminated. So in this particular question, this distractor should be eliminated. It is disease with no shunt. So none of the students are taking it because they assume that there must be shunt if there is cyanosis. So this option is not being selected at all. So this is a is equivalent of a nil kind of option. So you have to remove this particular option. So I have just now briefly covered how to prepare an MCQ and how to do item analysis. I hope this is helpful. So if you have any queries, you can ask in the comments and I'll try to answer them. The references for this video Predominantly, there's a book called as Construction of Written Questions for Basic and Clinical Sciences by the National Board of Medical Examiners. And a few of the contents are from the Trainer's Manual from National Teachers Training Center, JIPMA, Moodle Manual, and Internet sources. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Click subscribe and click like if you like the video.